Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. In today's video I'm going to be showing you how to sew this trending crop top with a flare sleeve, as you can see right here, alongside how to sew a short pencil skirt. I used 2 yards of Ankara fabric for this style for both the pencil skirt and the crop top, and I also used lining for this. You're going to be learning a lot from today's video, so just sit back and enjoy this video. Thank you so much. Please remember to like the video, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment. So the first thing I did was I have some part of the Ankara that I've cut out and I placed it on fold. And right here I'll just go ahead and draw a straight line from the top of the fabric, and then from this straight line I'll be drawing out my neck width measurements. I'm using 2.5 because I'm putting into consideration the sewing allowance. So I'm using 2.5 for both the neck depth and the neck width. So after you mark on both sides, you just use your French curve and you connect it like this. And this, we have successfully drawn out the neckline for the top. The next thing we're going to do now is to mark our shoulder line. So my shoulder is 15, but for the sake of today's tutorial I'm going to be adding half an inch to it. So I'm marking about 7.25 inch, that is, I'm dividing it by 2. So after this I'll go down by 1 inch from that point and I'll connect it to the neck width. So from the straight line again, I'm going to be marking my chest line measurements. Usually my chest line is 8 inches, but for the sake of today's tutorial I'm using 8.5 inches. This is a very free crop top and that's why I'm adding the extra half an inch to it. At this point I'll go ahead and draw the straight line, and then also the next thing I'm going to do is to mark the length of the crop top that I'm using. I'm using 17.5 and I'm adding 1 inch extra for sewing allowance. That is 18.5 in all. After that I'll just go ahead and draw a straight line. As you can see, I'm differentiating the line, the sewing allowance from the main length of the top. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be marking quarter of my bust measurement. So quarter of my bust measurement is 8.5 plus half an inch extra for sewing allowance. So I marked 9 inches. And then at this point I will replicate exactly what I have for the shoulder measurements. I'm going to be marking it on the chest line like this. And then remember, I've already marked quarter of my bust measurements plus half an inch for sewing for ease, and then extra 1 inch for sewing allowance. Then at this point just go ahead and connect it. So from the shoulder you measure all the way to the chest line. I got 7.5. I'll divide it by 2 and I'll go in by half an inch on this point like this. And then with this now I'll be using my French curve and I'll be connecting it from the shoulder all the way through the half an inch all the way to the bust measurement. And this will be the armhole for the front, while for the armhole for the back I'm going to just connect it directly on the straight line like this. Then after that, the next thing I'm going to be doing is on the length of the crop top, which is my waist measurements, which is my waistline, I'm going to be marking quarter of my waist measurement. So quarter of my waist measurement is 7 plus 1 inch for ease and extra 1 inch for sewing allowance. At this point I'll just go ahead and connect it like this, and I'll connect it down to the sewing allowance. So at this point I'll just go ahead and cut it out, and we are basically done with the drafting of the front pattern. So with this front pattern now, I'll be placing, when you open it up, this is what it looks like. So I'll be placing it on another piece of fabric, as you can see right here, and I've placed it on fold as well. Although for the back you don't need to cut it on fold like the front. So what I'm doing is I'll place it 1 inch away from the part that is on fold, and I'll draw a straight line like this. So that 1 inch extra will be for the sewing allowance for the zip. So after that, just go ahead and cut exactly what you have on the front fabric, that is on the front pattern. You cut it on the other fabric as well. So you also go ahead and open up that zipper allowance like this. So here now I'll be going up by 1.5 inches on the neckline for the from the front, that is from the front neckline. I'll go up by 1.5 inches, and this will be the new neckline for the back. At this point I'll use my front curve and I'll connect it to the shoulder. So after connecting it with my front curve, I'll just cut it out, and I'll cut the remaining part of it as well. So after this, I'll remove the back from the front, and this is what we have. So for the front, I'll just go ahead and remove the armhole allowance for the back. And here we have it. We have the back and the front. So the next thing now is to draft the down part of the dress, which is the skirt parts. So to draft the pencil skirt, just the way you draft your normal basic pencil skirt. The only difference is the length of it and how I'm going to be cutting it. So now I'll just go down I'll mark my hip line measurement, which is 8.5, and I'll mark the length of the skirt. So I'm using 19 inches as the length of the skirt. So you just mark 8.5 here, and then you mark the length of the skirt. So now the length is dependent on how you want it to be, okay? And also the hip line is also dependent on the measurements of your clients. So after this, you just mark it out, and then remember to add 1 inch also for the sewing allowance, that is for hemline. So at this point, remember our fabric is on fold. So on the waistline, which is that top part, I'll mark quarter of my waist measurements plus 1 inch for sewing allowance. For this skirt, we are not adding extra allowance because the skirt is supposed to be fitted. While for the hip line, I'll mark quarter of my hip measurements plus 1 inch for sewing allowance. So from this point, and it's 11 inches. So I'll minus 1.5 inch from this point, and I'll mark 9.5 inch on the hemline like this. And then at this point, I'll just go ahead and connect it to the hip line, and then from the hip line, I'll connect it to the waistline. So pay attention to the way I am drawing the curve to form the hip of the dress. So at this point, I'll just go ahead and cut it out, and this is what we have for the front skirt. But to cut the back skirt, we are going to do the same thing, just like we did for the top. We are doing the same thing. I'm going to place it on another piece of fabric like this, and I'll cut out exactly what we have in front. But the only difference is I'm adding 1 inch for zipper allowance. Another thing I'm going to be doing on that zipper point, I'm going to go in by 1/2 inch. This is what we call hip contour, so that the skirt will be perfectly fitted around the butt. Okay, so just go in by 1/2 inch and connect it to the hip line, and then you cut it out like this. And so with this, we are done with the back of the skirt. So for the sleeve now, the first thing we are going to do is I've placed my fabric on fold, and the length of the sleeve is 22 inches thereabouts. So I'm going to divide my bust by 12, and I'll add 1.5 inches to it. So I got 4.5, and I'm marking it at that point. So with this, I'll draw a straight line. So on this line now, I'm going to be marking my chest line measurements. So my chest line is 8.5 minus 1 inch, that is 7.5. And then I'll add extra 1 inch again to it for sewing allowance. And then from here, I'm going to be dividing this by 2, and I'll go up by 1/2 inch. And then from here, I'll just go ahead and connect it like this. So with this, we have drawn the crown of the sleeve. So the next thing now is to mark the length of the sleeve that you want. So I'm using 21 inches, that is 21.5 inches, plus extra 1 inch for sewing allowance. So just go ahead and mark the extra 1 inch right there. On this, the length of the sleeve, you can determine how wide you want the sleeve to be. Like mine, I use 12 inches. Yours can be 13, 14. Just depends on how full you want the sleeve to be. Okay, so when you decide that, you're going to connect it to the crown depth like this, and then now you just go ahead and cut it out. So after that, this is what we have. So for the front part of the sleeve, I'm just going to be going in by half an inch, just like we did while drafting the pattern for the front, that is for the bodies. I'm going to do the same thing for the sleeve as well, and this is what we have. So go ahead and label the front and the back, and you cut 2 pieces of that is for the 2 sleeve. So now I've gone ahead to cut the lining for the top, that is the front part of the top. I've cut the lining, and when you open it up, this is what it looks like. So now I'm just going to be placing the lining on the fabric, and I will sew using half an inch sewing allowance. So after sewing, go ahead and notch it open like this. So remember, like I always say, the essence of notching is so that you can be able to turn it to the right side effortlessly. Okay, so at this point, when you turn it to the right side, see where the allowance is facing, just go ahead and understitch it so that you can easily face it to the right side, and you have a clean work by the time you're done. So at this point, I'm done with that, and this is what it looks like. So this is for the back. I've also cut lining for the back as well. So what I'm doing now is I'll open it up, I'll place the lining on the fabric, and I'll sew using half an inch sewing allowance, just like what we did for the front. We are going to do the same thing for the back. So also remember to notch it open, and then after notching, you're going to turn it to the right side and understitch it. So you understitch for both sides of the back. So after understitching and ironing it, this is what it looks like. So the next thing now is to turn it to the wrong side, as you can see. So at this point now, I'm going to be reducing the lining by 0.25 inch. And the reason for this is because by the time we are turning it to the right side, I don't want the lining to be bulging out of the fabric, and that's why I'm cutting it. So go ahead and do the same for yours, and then you sew it joining into the fabric using half an inch sewing allowance, and also for the side seam, it's using 0.25 inch sewing allowance. So I'll do the same thing for the front as well. I'll reduce it by 0.25 inch. I'll join it at the hemline, and I'll join it at the side seam. So for the skirt part of the dress, I reduced the lining. Instead of reducing it by 0.25 like I did for the front, that is the top, I reduced it by 1 inch for the skirt parts. If the main fabric is longer than the lining, there's no problem with that. Okay, just go ahead and sew it the way it is. Don't make any adjustment, just sew it. Let the main fabric be excess. Okay, so now I will join it at the waistline using half an inch sewing allowance, and then after that you turn it to the right side and understitch it. So after understitching, I'm just going to join the lining to the fabric. So at this point, when you're sewing it and the lining is shorter than the main fabric, there's no challenge, just sew it as it is. By the time you turn it to the right side, you're going to see how it will form a beautiful design right there at that lining point. So I'm going to do the same thing for the back part of the skirt as well. I'll sew it at the waistline, and I'll sew it at the hemline as well. So after sewing, this is what we have. So I'll just turn it to the right side like this, and then you give it a good press. You're going to turn the same thing for the front as well. You turn it to the right side, and you give it a very good press so that it can be well relaxed. So as you can see now, this is what I was talking about. The lining part of the skirts, you can see the main fabric bulging out in front, that is on the lining part, and that's the essence of we reducing it. That is reducing the lining by 1 inch. Okay, so now I'm going to be joining the back to the front at the side seam. Place it together and you sew using the allowance that we left while cutting. So I'll do the same thing here as well. On the other side of the skirt, I'll join it, and then I'll sew from the waistline down to the hemline using the allowance that we left while cutting. So at this point now, for the crop top, I'm going to be joining it at the shoulder first and foremost, and I'll join it at the side seam. So to join it at the shoulder, I'm going to open it up like this, joining the lining of the front to the lining of the back, and also the fabric of the front and the fabric of the back. So make sure you're using 1/2 inch sewing allowance and they are well placed and everything is arranged before you sew. So the midpoints of the front should align to the midpoint of the back, and then you sew like that. So by the time you are done sewing that, you can sew the side seam. Okay, use the allowance that we left. You can even take the body measurements at this point when you are sewing the side seam. So after sewing this, what we have, the next thing now is to join the zip to this. And for the sleeve, I've also gone ahead to cut the lining as well. And as you can see, I created a little design for the lining because I want the main fabric to be showing up by the time I'm turning it to the right side. I don't want the lining to be showing outside. I want the main fabric. That's the reason why I divided the lining into two like that. Without mixing the fabric, you can just cut it. So now you join the lining, the sleeve to the crop top, that is the armhole, just the way you join sleeve to a dress. It's the same way you're going to be joining this. And then at that point, you close the side seam and we are done with the crop top. So for the skirts, as you can see, I've joined the side seam and this is what we have. You can give this a very good press and then you turn it to the wrong side. So at this point, I close the zipper point, that is the zipper line of the skirt. So you can open it up like this, and this is what we have. So at this point, I sewed from the hip line down to about 8 inches or 7 inches thereabout away from the hip line. So while I'm sewing, I use 1 inch from that hip line, and I sewed, increasing it to about 2 inches down. So with this, by the time you wear it, it will be well placed around your butt. So at this point, you can add your invisible zip to the back of the skirt, and this is what we have by the time you're done. And that's basically all for this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't. Bye.